The childhood photos showed two brothers playing in the backyard. 8-year-old David and 5-year-old Miguel, building forts, chasing butterflies, laughing in the summer sun. But when Ellen asked David Martinez to tell her about his childhood, his answer shattered the studio. "I burned my house down and killed my brother." David Martinez, 28, sat in the interview chair, with the weight of 2 decades pressing down on his shoulders. For 20 years, he had carried a secret so devastating that it had shaped every day of his adult life. His family believed Miguel had died in a tragic house fire, caused by faulty wiring. David knew the truth was far worse. The Ellen DeGeneres Show had invited David during their Overcoming Tragedy Week to discuss how people rebuild their lives after devastating loss. His story had moved producers. A young man who had lost his brother in a house fire and dedicated his life to fire safety education. He worked with the fire department, taught children about fire prevention, and had become a respected advocate for home safety. What Ellen's producers didn't know was that David's entire career was built on guilt. Every life he saved, every child he educated, every fire he helped prevent, was his way of trying to balance the scales for the life he had taken. The brother he had killed, the family he had destroyed, the secret he had carried alone for 20 years. The fire had happened on a Tuesday afternoon in October. David's parents had gone to the grocery store, leaving him to watch Miguel for an hour. At 8 years old, David had been fascinated by matches, drawn to the way they sparked and flamed. He had found a book of matches in the kitchen drawer and taken them to his bedroom to play. "David," Ellen began gently, "you've dedicated your life to fire safety education. What inspired that calling?" David's hands shook slightly as he spoke. "Personal experience. I learned firsthand how dangerous fire can be." Ellen nodded sympathetically. "You lost your brother Miguel in a house fire when you were children. That must have been traumatic." "It was," David said quietly. "But it was more complicated than people know." Ellen sensed there was deeper pain beneath David's composed exterior. "How so?" "Because the fire wasn't an accident," David said, his voice barely audible. The studio fell silent. Ellen felt her chest tighten as she realized they were approaching something unthinkable. "David, what do you mean?" David looked up at Ellen with eyes that held 20 years of anguish. "I started the fire. I was playing with matches in my bedroom." Ellen felt the weight of David's confession settling over the studio. "You were 8 years old. Old enough to know better," David said. "Old enough to know matches were dangerous. But I wanted to see how they worked." Ellen realized David was describing a childhood accident with devastating consequences. "Tell us what happened that day." "My parents went to the store," David explained. "They left me to watch Miguel. He was playing in the living room, and I went to my bedroom to play with the matches I'd found." "What happened next?" "I lit one and dropped it on my bedspread," David said, tears beginning to form. "I tried to put it out, but it spread so fast. Within minutes, my whole room was on fire." Ellen felt the horror of what David was describing. "What did you do?" "I ran to get Miguel," David said, "but he was scared of the smoke. He hid under the coffee table in the living room instead of coming with me." "Did you try to get him out?" "I tried," David sobbed. "I tried to reach him, but the smoke was so thick, the fire was spreading so fast. I was 8 years old, and I panicked." Ellen realized David was describing a child's response to an impossible situation. "So you got out of the house?" "I ran outside and screamed for help," David said. "The neighbors came running, the fire department came. But by the time they got Miguel out, he didn't survive." David shook his head. "Smoke inhalation." He was only 5 years old. The studio was completely silent, except for the sound of David's quiet sobs. Ellen felt overwhelmed by the tragedy David was describing. "David, what did you tell people about how the fire started?" "Nothing," David said. "I was in shock. The fire investigator said it was probably electrical. My parents were devastated, but they never suspected I had caused it." "So for 20 years, you've let them believe it was an accident?" "It was an accident," David said desperately. "I didn't mean to kill him. I was just playing. Ellen felt the weight of David's guilt and his family's unknowing grief. But you've never told them the truth? How do I tell my parents that I killed their baby? David asked. How do I tell them that Miguel died because I was playing with matches? Ellen realized David had been carrying this burden completely alone. David, you were 8 years old. Children that age don't understand the consequences of their actions. I understood that fire was dangerous, David said. My parents had told me never to play with matches. I disobeyed them, and my brother died because of it. Ellen felt the impossible weight of childhood guilt that had never been processed or healed. Is this why you became involved in fire safety education? Everything I do is for Miguel, David said. Every child I teach about fire safety, every life I save, it's all trying to make up for what I did. Ellen realized David's entire adult life was an act of penance. But David, you can't bring Miguel back. I know, David said. But maybe I can prevent other families from going through what mine did. Ellen felt moved by David's dedication, but concerned about his guilt. Have you ever considered telling your family the truth? Every day, David said. But they've built their lives around the belief that it was a tragic accident. If I tell them it was my fault, what do you think would happen? They'd hate me, David said simply. They'd blame me for destroying their family, and they'd be right. Ellen made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. David, your parents are here today. David's face went completely white.
What? Ellen? No.
They can't know. Please don't tell them. They came to support you, Ellen said gently. They're proud of the work you do with fire safety. They won't be proud when they know the truth, David said, panic rising in his voice. Ellen gestured toward the wings. Maria and Carlos Martinez. Would you like to join David? David's parents emerged from backstage. Maria, 54, a gentle woman with David's eyes, and Carlos, 56, a sturdy man whose face showed the lines of 20 years of grief. They approached their son with love and concern. Misho, Maria said, kissing David's forehead. You look upset. What's wrong? David couldn't meet his mother's eyes. Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something. Carlos sat down beside his son. What is it? You can tell us anything. It's about the fire, David said, his voice shaking. It's about how Miguel died. Maria's expression grew concerned. What about it? It wasn't electrical, David said. The fire investigators were wrong. Carlos looked confused. What do you mean? David took a deep breath, looking at his parents for the first time. I started the fire. I was playing with matches in my bedroom. The silence that followed was deafening. Maria stared at her son as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. What? She whispered. I found matches in the kitchen drawer, David continued. I took them to my room to play with them. I dropped one on my bed, and it caught fire. Carlos was struggling to process what he was hearing. You started the fire? I tried to put it out, David said desperately. But it spread so fast. By the time I ran to get Miguel, the house was full of smoke. Maria was crying now, but her expression was unreadable. You knew this whole time? I was 8 years old, David said. I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you. Ellen watched this family confrontation unfold with growing concern. Maria, Carlos, how are you feeling? Maria looked at her son with a mixture of pain and confusion. 20 years, David. 20 years we've wondered how that fire started. I'm sorry, David sobbed. I'm so sorry. I killed Miguel. I killed your baby. Carlos was quiet for a long moment, then spoke with surprising gentleness. Son, you were 8 years old. David looked up with surprise. Dad, 8-year-olds play with matches, Carlos said. It's what children do when they don't understand danger. But I disobeyed you, David said. You told me never to touch matches. And you were 8, Maria said, her voice breaking. Children disobey their parents. That's normal. Ellen felt the family's pain, but also their love. David, how does it feel to finally tell them? Terrifying, David said honestly. I thought they would hate me. Hate you? Maria said, pulling David into her arms. Misho, you're our son. We love you. But I killed Miguel, David said into his mother's shoulder. An 8-year-old boy made a mistake, Carlos said firmly. A terrible, tragic mistake. But it was still a mistake. Ellen realized the family's love was stronger than their grief. Maria, Carlos. What do you want David to understand? That we don't blame him, Maria said. We've never blamed him. If we had known the truth, we would have gotten him help to deal with the guilt. Instead, he's carried this burden alone for 20 years, Carlos added. David pulled back from his mother's embrace. But Miguel is still dead because of me. Miguel is dead because of a terrible accident, Maria corrected. An accident caused by a child who didn't understand the consequences of his actions. Ellen felt the power of their forgiveness. David, your parents are showing you incredible grace. We should have been showing him this grace 20 years ago, Carlos said. If we had known he was carrying this guilt, what would you have done differently? Ellen asked. We would have gotten him therapy, Maria said. We would have helped him understand that it wasn't his fault. We would have grieved together instead of separately, Carlos added. David was crying again, but these tears seemed different, less desperate, more healing. I've spent 20 years trying to make up for what I did, and that's why you became a fire safety educator. Ellen asked, every child I teach, every family I help, it's all for Miguel, David said. Maria looked at her son with new understanding. That's why you've dedicated your whole life to this work. I thought if I could save enough lives, maybe it would balance out taking his, David said. Carlos shook his head. Son, it doesn't work that way. You can't bring Miguel back by saving other people. Then what was the point of all this work? David asked. The point is that you've prevented other families from going through what we went through, Maria said. You've turned your pain into purpose. Ellen felt moved by the family's healing process. David, how do you feel now that your parents know the truth? Scared, David said honestly, but also relieved. I've been carrying this secret for so long. What are you scared of? Ellen asked. That now that they know, everything will change, David said. Carlos took his son's hand. Everything has already changed, son. Now we can heal together. What does that mean? David asked. It means we can visit Miguel's grave together, Maria said. It means you can stop punishing yourself for being 8 years old. It means we can be a family again, Carlos added. Ellen made an announcement. David, your work with the fire department has been extraordinary. I understand you've personally saved dozens of lives through your education programs. David nodded. It's the only thing that's given my life meaning. What if I told you that meaning doesn't have to come from guilt? Ellen asked. What do you mean? What if your work matters not because you're trying to make up for Miguel's death, but because you genuinely care about keeping families safe? David was quiet for a moment. I've never thought about it that way. The children you've taught about fire safety, they're alive because you care about them, not because you feel guilty about Miguel, Ellen continued. Maria squeezed her son's hand. She's right, Your work comes from love, not guilt. Ellen addressed the family. What happens now? Now we grieve Miguel together, Carlos said. All of us, for the first time in 20 years. And we help David understand that he was a child who made a tragic mistake, Maria added. And I stop trying to bring back Miguel and start honoring his memory instead, David said quietly. Ellen felt the beauty of the family's healing. What would honoring his memory look like? Living fully, David said. Not just surviving, not just trying to make up for what happened. And continuing your fire safety work because it matters, not because you feel obligated, Ellen suggested. The episode aired 2 months later and generated an overwhelming response from viewers who had carried childhood guilt into adulthood. Many wrote to thank David for showing that families could heal from even the most devastating secrets. David continued his fire safety work, but with a different motivation. Instead of trying to balance scales of guilt, he worked because he genuinely wanted to protect families. The difference was profound. His presentations became more effective, his relationships with colleagues improved, and his own mental health began to heal. 6 months later, David returned to Ellen's show with his parents. They had been attending family therapy together and had visited Miguel's grave as a family for the first time since the funeral. "How are things now?" Ellen asked. "Different," David said. "Better. I still miss Miguel every day, but I don't hate myself anymore. We've learned to talk about Miguel as a family," Maria added, "to share happy memories instead of just grief." Ellen kept a photo from that follow-up show. David standing between his parents at Miguel's grave, all of them holding flowers and smiling through tears. It reminded her that some secrets are too heavy for one person to carry, and that love really can be stronger than guilt. Because David learned that childhood mistakes don't define adult worth, that carrying guilt doesn't honor the dead, living fully does, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is forgive yourself, so you can be present for the family you still have. Miguel Martinez had died in a fire 20 years ago, but his legacy lived on, not in his brother's guilt, but in the hundreds of children who learned fire safety from a man who understood the devastating consequences of a moment's carelessness. Sometimes the greatest tragedy becomes the greatest purpose when guilt transforms into wisdom and love conquers shame.